Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
The 1869 culmination of Leo Tolstoy's literary and philosophical endeavours, War and Peace, represents a titanic undertaking, a work that seeks to contain the completeness of human experience within its pages. It is a text that defies simple categorization, functioning simultaneously as a sweeping historical chronicle, a profound philosophical treatise, an intimate family saga, and a foundational document of psychological realism. Its genesis lies in a confluence of personal experience and deep intellectual engagement with the prevailing currents of 19th century European thought. Tolstoy's own service as an artillery officer in the Crimean War, detailed in his Sevastopol sketches, provided him with a visceral understanding of the chaos, contingency, and visceral reality of battle, a perspective that would become central to his systematic dismantling of the romanticized, top-down view of military conflict. Intellectually, the work emerged from the fervent Russian debates between Slavophiles, who championed a unique, spiritually oriented path for Russia, and Westernizers, who advocated for a more European model of development. Tolstoy, while deeply Russian, absorbed and contended with the titans of Western thought, positioning his epic as a response to their intellectual systems. His reading of Stendhal, particularly the depiction of the Battle of Waterloo in a Charterhouse of Parma, offered a template for portraying warfare from the bewildered perspective of a single participant, a technique he would elevate to a high art. Furthermore, the philosophical ideas of Arthur Schopenhauer regarding the primacy of an irrational, underlying will informed Tolstoy's growing skepticism toward human reason as the primary driver of events, while the providential historicism of the conservative thinker Joseph de Maistre provided a thesis against which Tolstoy could build his own complex, immanent theory of history. The project began with the intention of being a novel about a Decembrist returning from exile in the 1850s, but Tolstoy found himself compelled to excavate the past, to understand the formative psychological and historical event that shaped the generation Napoleon's in 1812 invasion of Russia. This backward-moving inquiry expanded the scope exponentially, transforming a political novel into a national epic. The work itself is a colossal edifice built upon a unique conceptual framework, one that integrates the infinitesimal movements of individual lives into the grand, seemingly inexplicable sweep of history. At its core is a radical philosophy of history, articulated in lengthy digressions and through the lived experiences of its characters. Tolstoy posits that history is the sum of an almost infinite number of individual human wills and actions. He uses a mathematical metaphor to explain this, describing the movement of peoples as the consequence of integrating these countless, minuscule impulses. The task of the historian, in his view, is to understand this differential of history, the minute, continuous expressions of human agency that collectively produce the momentum of an era. This a priori demolishes the great man theory of history, which attributes world-changing events to the genius or will of singular figures like Napoleon or Tsar Alexander. For Tolstoy, these leaders are merely the most visible and self-deluded actors, men who believe they are directing the storm while being swept along by its currents. Napoleon is portrayed with particular, analytical scorn, a man of immense vanity, whose orders on the battlefield of Borodino frequently miscarry or bear little relation to the actual unfolding of the conflict, which proceeds according to its own terrible and emergent logic. Tolstoy's mechanism for demonstrating this is his narrative technique, which atomizes the epic event. He dissolves the grand battle into a series of disconnected, bewildering and intensely personal moments as experienced by characters like Pilar Bezikov, a civilian wanderer on the field, or the wounded Andrei Bolkonsky, whose celestial epiphany comes while lying on his back, observing the lofty indifference. This philosophical project is advanced through pioneering literary techniques. One of the most consequential is what the Russian formalist critic Viktor Shklovsky would later term ostrayny, or defamiliarization. Tolstoy forces the reader to see familiar rituals and institutions as if for the first time, stripping them of their conventional meaning. A prime example is Natasha Rostova's experience at the opera, where the performance is described as a bizarre collection of painted boards, strangely dressed people making odd gestures, and synchronized shouting. By presenting the event through a naive but perceptive consciousness, Tolstoy exposes the artificiality of high society's conventions. He applies this same lens to the councils of war, the sounds of St. Petersburg, and the pageantry of statecraft, revealing the hollow core within the gilded shell. The novel's structure is famously polyphonic, a term later developed by Mikhail Bakhtin, where numerous character consciousnesses are presented with equal validity, creating a dialogic interplay of perspectives. There is no single, authoritative viewpoint instead. The narrative truth emerges from the counterpoint of Andrei's cynical intellectualism, Pierre's bumbling spiritual quest, and Natasha's vibrant, instinctual embrace of life, what the Russians call живая жизнь, Tolstoy's use of the interior monologue, where he plunges directly into the flowing, associative, and often contradictory thoughts of his characters, was revolutionary. It prefigured the stream of consciousness techniques that would become a hallmark of modernist fiction decades later, allowing him to portray human psychology with a previously unseen depth and fidelity. The novel's rhythm is established by the deliberate alternation between the worlds of peace, characterized by the domestic dramas, social ambitions, romantic entanglements of the Rostov and Bolkonsky families, and the world of war, with its chaos, brutality, and existential immediacy. This structure itself is an argument that the small, private lives of individuals are the true substance of history, the very material from which the larger events are woven. The immediate impact of war and peace upon its serialization and eventual publication was immense and contentious. Appearing in Mikhail Katkov's journal, The Russian Messenger, between 1865 and 1869, it captivated the reading public while simultaneously provoking the ire of professional historians and military veterans. They took issue with Tolstoy's historical inaccuracies and, more fundamentally, with his iconoclastic portrayal of the 1812 campaign. His depiction of General Kutuzov as a patient, passive, and intuitive leader who understands the futility of grand strategy and wins by yielding to the inevitable flow of events was a direct affront to the prevailing patriotic narratives. Debates raged in the press, with critics accusing Tolstoy of historical nihilism and a lack of respect for Russia's military heroes. Yet, its power was undeniable. Ivan Turgenev, a literary rival, famously expressed a mixture of awe and exasperation, acknowledging its genius while lamenting its sprawling, monstrous form and its philosophical digressions. Gustave Flaubert, another master of realism, wrote in a letter of his admiration for the novel's lifelike scenes but was critical of the author's direct philosophical intrusions, believing the author should remain as invisible as God in his creation. For Tolstoy, however, these intrusions were the entire point. The narrative was the evidence for the philosophical argument, and the argument gave meaning to the narrative. The work's initial application was thus as a cultural and intellectual catalyst, forcing Russia to re-examine its own foundational myth and challenging the very discipline of history as it was then practiced. In the decades and century that followed, the use and interpretation of War and Peace evolved dramatically. It transitioned from a national epic into a global literary touchstone. For the generation of modernist writers, Tolstoy's achievement was a source of both inspiration and anxiety. Virginia Woolf, in her essay The Russian Point of View, marveled at his ability to capture the soul and to ask the ultimate questions about life's purpose, seeing in his work a vastness that made English fiction seem constrained and materialistic. Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, with its own monumental scope, exploration of high society, and deep psychological plumbing, owes a clear structural and thematic debt to Tolstoy's novel. The specific person-to-person influence is perhaps most powerfully demonstrated in the 20th century. The Soviet writer Vasily Grossman consciously modelled his own masterpiece, Life and Fate, on the Tolstoyan epic, adopting its structure, its blend of family saga and historical chronicle, and its philosophical scope to explore the Battle of Stalingrad and the moral catastrophes of the Soviet regime. Grossman's work stands as a direct, 20th century dialogue with Tolstoy's 19th century vision. Philosophically, the work's legacy was cemented by Isaiah Berlin's famous 1953 essay, The Hedgehog and the Fox. Berlin used Tolstoy as his central case study to explore two fundamental types of thinkers: the hedgehogs, who know one big thing and relate everything to a single, central vision, and the foxes, who know many things and pursue many disparate ends. Berlin's brilliant and enduring insight was to diagnose Tolstoy as a fox by nature, who believed himself to be a hedgehog. Tolstoy's genius, Berlin argued, lay in his pluralistic, fox-like perception of the infinite variety of human experience, while his intellectual ambition drove him to seek a single, unifying, hatred-like theory of history, a quest that created the central, productive tension of the novel. Critiques and revisions of understanding have continued to shape the novel's reception. The initial complaints about the philosophical sections, particularly the dense second epilogue, have persisted, with some readers and critics finding them to be an artless appendage to an otherwise masterful narrative. This perspective, however, overlooks the indivisibility of Tolstoy's project. To excise the philosophy is to treat the work as a mere historical romance, a misreading of its fundamental purpose. More sophisticated critiques have emerged from various theoretical schools. Marxist literary critics like Georg Lukács praised the novel as a pinnacle of critical realism, A work that, despite its author's aristocratic background, managed to capture the totality of a society at a historical turning point and expose the contradictions of its ruling class. From a formalist perspective, the novel is celebrated for its narrative innovations, its manipulation of perspective, and its radical challenge to generic conventions. It is a work that required new critical tools to be fully understood, prompting thinkers like Shklovsky and Bakhtin to develop concepts that are now indispensable to literary theory. Tolstoy himself engaged in a form of revision, though his was more of a spiritual and philosophical evolution. In his later years, after his conversion to a form of radical Christian anarchism, he looked back on his great novels with a degree of disdain, viewing them as products of his own vanity and a distraction from the more urgent task of spiritual and social reform. This personal critique, while fascinating, does little to diminish the work's towering stature. It is a subtle irony that the creator of a work so profoundly sceptical of individual greatness would himself become one of the most influential individuals in the history of literature, a testament to the complex, unresolved relationship between freedom and necessity that his epic so masterfully explores. The enduring legacy of War and Peace is its successful creation of a complete world, a universe of thought and feeling so vast and so detailed that it offers a measure for both literature and life itself. It remains an inexhaustible text, a monument to the human attempt to comprehend the incomprehensible, and a humbling reminder of the power of art to articulate the very texture of existence.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.